People of Reddit who have met a celebrity, which one and how was the experience? My dad and I went to a con for my 16th birthday. As we are just walking around, we see this guy in a really good Jack Sparrow costume, so we ask if we can snap a photo, and he says of course. So I stand next to him and my dad snaps the photo. A few months after the con, he's talking to one of his co-workers and shows him the photo. Apparently I got a photo unknowingly with Johnny Depp, who's known to go to small cons in full costume. My experience with him was great. He was super kind and chill. At Warped Tour 99 I met Eminem before he got famous, and I had no idea who he was. I accidentally kicked a rock into the back of his shoe, and when he turned around I started to apologize, and he immediately began yelling and calling me a bitch. A few minutes later my friends and I were waiting for a band to start on one stage, but the performer on the stage next to us was getting booed by everyone, so we look over, and I'm like, oh hey, it's that guy who called me a bitch. Boo-oh. Anyway, he got booed off the stage in his hometown of Detroit. A few months later he was all over MTV and music magazines, and then everyone knew who he was. Taylor Swift is known pretty well for her ways she meets fans. I was at her 1989 tour. It was my first Taylor concert, and she was performing Love Story, where she just circles the building on her piano. I was so happy in that moment I started to cry. Next thing I know, someone is tapping on my shoulder and I turn around and see her mom. She asked me how I was and I was crying and said I'm doing great. She asked who I was there with and was really shocked when I told her I was by myself. She was essentially mobbed then, with people crowding her to give her stuff to give to Taylor. I thought we had finished talking until she grabbed my hands again and asked if I wanted to meet Taylor. After the concert, a group of us who had all been invited to meet Taylor went backstage. There was a room set up with pizza, soda, themed cookies and a photo booth. They told us no selfies or videos and to wait our turn. Her mom came up to me and asked to take a picture with me, and her aunt came and introduced herself to me and talked. Taylor came out and talked to every single group for ages. She's truly a gem of a person. She wanted to hear everything you had to say and was always asking questions and truly listening. It was my 18th birthday and she wrote a note about it and made everyone sing to me lol. When she heard I came by herself, she made me promise not to leave until she found someone to walk me to my car. She ended up sending her head of security with me. Later I posted my picture on Tumblr. She must have seen it and followed me. 3 years later I went to see her in London and she saw on Tumblr and invited me backstage. She technically wasn't allowed to have people there, so she hid us in the hallway. Talked to me like we were old friends. Incredible through and through. My dad wrote a book called Horse Soldiers. It was adapted into a movie called 12 Strong. My family got to go the premiere in Nick, and I got to meet Chris Hemsworth, Michael Shannon, and Rob Riggle. I also got to meet Matt Damon because he was also just watching the premiere. My family got to meet Chris and my grandma dropped her bag and Chris picked it up. My grandma looked at him with pure adoration in her eyes. Later, after discovering that Chris Hemsworth's wife is several years older than him, exclaimed, now that I know he's into older women, I might have a chance. I met Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore when they were married, when they rented a nearby house for the Super Bowl in town. I was super young and a bunch of us rode our bikes to see them. He made a point of walking out to hug and take pictures with everyone and was all around a super charming guy. She was a little more standoffish but still sweet. He drove around the neighborhood a few times the days before and would always smile and wave to everyone. My dad worked on Equus when Daniel Radcliffe starred in it. He got me a ticket to the Christmas Eve show, and afterwards I was brought backstage with the cast and crew for a little party in one of the dressing rooms. As I was walking into the dressing room, Daniel was just standing in the doorway and said something like "Pardon me," so I could get in, like he was in my way. I remember turning bright red and telling him he was fantastic, and he shook my hand and thanked me for coming. He was so genuine and chill. My dad, who was a part of the crew, got to interact with him pretty frequently, enough to have little inside jokes even, and he also said he was one of the most down-to-earth people he'd ever met. All in all, a really cool guy and a phenomenal actor. Side note: this was the play that required his character to be completely naked at one point. I remember how surreal it was to shake the hand of someone I'd seen in all of the Harry Potter movies growing up and thinking, wow, I just saw your penis and now we're in a doorway shaking hands and my god, you are lovely. I worked at a coffee shop when I was younger, a Starbucks inside a gigantic Chapters store. Robin Williams came in while I was working and I took his order and made his coffee. I was completely starstruck, he was my favorite movie star when I was a kid. I didn't have much of an interaction with him, he was courteous, but just after a coffee and something to read. What really struck me was that there were maybe 60 or 70 other people getting coffee or looking at books, and every single one of them was staring at him the entire time he was there. People talk about the price of fame, and it always sounded like horseshit to me, but after that I totally believe it. Imagine never being able to go and do anything without everyone who saw you knowing who you were, and, for them, any interaction you have becomes a story they remember. It's fucked up. I've told this story before. I've met a lot of famous people, used to be a waiter in Napa Valley. The one that left the biggest impression on me though, was when I was 6 years old. John Wayne. I had just gotten a double mastoidectomy and was roomed with another kid my age at the UCLA Children's Hospital. About 4 hours after surgery, I woke up to this tall-assed man walking into my room. He walked over to the other kid, who was non-verbal and experiencing lung problems, and sat and talked to him for the next half hour to an hour. Then he got up, came over to me and asked about the bandages covering my head. I then realized that he looked familiar. As I'm answering, in walks my grandmother. She does a double take and asks Mr. Wayne, "What are you doing here?" He smiled, held out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm John Wayne." My grandma's jaw dropped, she shook his hand and said, "I'm Ruby, Greg's grandmother." Mr. Wayne turns to me and says, "Hi, Greg." Mr. Wayne then explains that the boy in the bed over is his grandson and that he was pretty ill. My grandma talks to him for a while, he smiles, turns to me and says, "Keep an eye on my grandson, okay, Greg?" I just nodded my head and told him, "Okay." My grandma is on cloud 9 the rest of the night. She handed me this clear plastic-headed Mickey Mouse gumball machine and puts it on the nightstand next to me. The next day, Mr. Wayne walks into the room and says, "How are you doing, Greg? How's my boy been?" I tell him my head hurts and that his grandson's been quiet. He pulls up a chair between our beds and asks me if I'd like to hear him read a story. I'm like, yeah. He spent the next hour or so reading us a couple stories from Grimm's fairy tales. I cut storytelling short by reaching for my Mickey Mouse gumball machine to get a gumball out and knocked it off the table. It shatters and gumballs are all over the floor. Mr. Wayne gets up and starts picking up all the stray gumballs. As he's picking up the shattered Mickey, in walks about 10 of my family members that my grandma had talked to. They were all shocked to see him standing there, holding my shattered Mickey. The next day, Mr. Wayne came in with a new Mickey Mouse gumball machine and told me that if his grandson woke up, I'd have to share them. I told him I would. For the duration of my stay, Mr. Wayne showed up every day to see his grandson and either sat to talk or read to him. He was a gentleman. I met Tom Holland. I was his Uber driver. I geeked out for a second, initially. He kind of popped out of nowhere, even if it was a non-celebrity, I would have been startled, but since it was him I was startled and blurted out, "You're Spider-Man," like a fucking idiot. He responded with, "No I'm not," and proceeded to ask about my day. Super nice, we talked for a bit, and the rest of the ride we both enjoyed our own music. He put his AirPods in and I with my car speakers. Luckily, I didn't freak him out too much because he left a nice tip through the app. I met Dave Chappelle a few years ago. Got to talk to him for about 20 minutes. He was really down to earth and just naturally funny and enjoyable to speak with. At a hotel I worked at as a valet I got to meet Post Malone, who was dining at the steakhouse connected to hotel. He pulled up in his custom Rolls-Royce with a white Suburban in tow with his guests and security. The coolest part of this story, other than being able to drive his car, was when he came outside for a smoke. He was by himself and we got to small talk for a good 5 minutes. The convo ranged from where we both grew up to what we like to do in our free time. He was a really cool, down-to-earth guy. P.S. Before anyone asks, no, he did not smell. Met Elton John backstage once. He was so businesslike that it was what I imagine it's like to meet the Queen. We were lucky enough to get backstage friends of Elton instead of friends of the band or press. So we had a lovely waiting room with free booze and snacks. We waited about 30 minutes till he was ready for us. Step 1. Stand in a line and shake hands with an individual comment for each person. Step 2. Ask for cameras and hand them to assistant. Step 3. He puts his chubby arms around you and smiles for the photo. Assistant takes like 3 photos per camera. Step 4. He thanks you for coming and tells you to enjoy the show. Total time? 1 minute for a group of 8. I met Simon Pegg when I was working as a cashier at Borders. I've told this story before, but it was like a Tuesday in the afternoon and the place was empty. He came up to me with some stationery and I started ringing him up. The entire time I was thinking he looked so much like him, but I didn't think it was him since I wasn't in the UK, and as far as I knew he wasn't filming a movie in Chicago, so it was a pretty quiet transaction. After it was done and I was handing him his bag with his stuff, I jokingly said, "Has anyone told you that you look like the guy from Shaun of the Dead?" He replied, "I am the guy from Shaun of the Dead." I almost ran over Katie Holmes on my bike back when she was filming Dawson's Creek. She was tiny, it was pitch black because they were filming down on the Sound, could have happened to anyone, anyway. I apologize profusely, honestly, I thought it was a little kid, and she was actually pretty nice about it. I recognized her voice before I recognized her. I would have asked for a picture, but, you know, I almost mowed over her on a bike, so I figured we were square. I snuck into a meet and greet with Weird Al Yankovic about 20 years ago. I was the only one without a camera or something for him to sign, and he seemed a little suspicious about that. I told him how much I appreciated his music, and he told me how much he appreciated me listening to it. Then we talked for a few minutes about my favorite song from the concert and what songs I'd like to have seen him perform. Super nice guy and didn't make me feel like just another annoying fan obligation. He seemed genuinely interested in our conversation. In 2011, 1 year before she won a gold medal in boxing, I spared Claressa Shields. From what I remember, no one mentioned that she was going to the Olympics, just that she was very good. I only found out later when I watched the matches and am rather glad she took it easy on me. I had gym class with Taylor Swift in high school. I was a senior and she was a freshman. She was kind and goofy. Uncoordinated and awkward as hell when it came to literally any sport we were doing. She'd just laugh at herself and have a good time. I remember not feeling well one day, so I hung back in the locker room when everyone ran out onto the court. She stayed with me, we weren't super close, and tried to take my mind off of feeling sick by asking me to describe my prom dress to her, lol. Down to what jewelry I was going to wear. Weird strategy, but the gesture was nice. All the seniors liked her. She hung out with us a lot when she dated Drew, she was just weird and nice and cool. Also, her surprised face is real. I've been doing the Comic-Con circuit for a couple years now, taking my nieces and nephew to meet their favorite celebrities, and some of mine as well. I've been fighting cancer on and off for 5 years and found out I am now stage IV, so I wanted to do big, memorable things with them in case I don't get to spend much of their adulthood with them. Plus, if I'm stuck contemplating my mortality, I might as well enjoy myself as much as I can. Some of the highlights. My oldest niece adores LOTR, and we met Elijah Wood. He's very nice and engaging. Kind of a hipster vibe, and he was dressed alternately like an old-timey train conductor and a mime. But she was over the moon after meeting him. My nephew loves Supernatural, so I took him to one of their cons. Everyone was great, but Jeffrey Dean Morgan actually had me tearing up, he was so sweet. I had just been diagnosed and was about to start chemo when we met him. I was a little emotional and ended up mentioning it, and he just pulled me into the biggest hug and said he loved the shit out of me and I was going to kick ass. He wouldn't even let me go at first, just kept hugging me and telling me everything was going to be okay. Makes me all misty just thinking about it. And I've taken my middle niece to meet a lot of Marvel actors. Tom Holland is her dream guy, and he's honestly the cutest, most adorable person. Tom Hiddleston is really sweet and very British, lol. Sebastian Stan is a very cool guy but can be kind of quiet. I think he was just tired though. Anthony Mackie, Elizabeth Olsen, and Paul Bettany were funny and nice. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about Charlie Cox and David Tennant. Even Michael Fassbender was a total pleasure. My other personal favorite though had to be Chris Evans. We were talking and I thanked him for his work with Christopher's Haven, etc. Before I left, he ended up reaching out and giving me a kiss on the back of my hand. I may or may not have swooned a little. Henry Winkler, the Fonz and Dr. Saperstein is the nicest celebrity, of which I have only met a few of, that I have ever met. Nearly every year I go to Philly Comic Con with my dad. We had met other celebrities in previous years like Matt Smith and Stan Lee. During both of those occasions it was for a quick signature, and that was it. Last year, however, we were walking around and we see Henry Winkler sitting at his booth with no line. We walk past it, thinking it was because he wasn't available yet, but we come back and see him talking to some people, so we ask the person at his booth how much things were. My dad buys a photo with him for not that much, and we wait in the small line to get the picture. When we go to stand next to him, he is automatically very welcoming, and we quickly mention what we liked him in, but he is willing to have a conversation, so we talk to Henry Winkler for at least 3 minutes before we run out of stuff to talk about, and then here's the kicker, he thanks us. Usually for photo ops you thank the celebrity and get out, but he thanked us and then shook our hands and said have a great day. Honestly, to this day I think about how nice he was. Now you might think that he was just being as courteous as you would expect anyone to be in public, but both the fact that it is not expected of him to be nice and the warmth with which he greeted us is something I'll never forget. I met Richard Simmons. He was on my flight to Venice. He was super friendly. Said he was going to buy hair dye for me because my son has red hair and he said we needed to match. Met Prince Edward while doing work experience at an airport. He was nice. Then I got invited into his plane, early Cessna Citation, and got to sit in the cockpit. Coming out of the cockpit, the Citation is an incredibly cramped plane. I accidentally kicked the main display and GPS, destroying the screens. Oops. I met Danielle Bregoli, aka Bad Baby, aka Cash Me Outside 2 weeks ago. She isn't acting out a part with her persona, she is actually pretty gross. I met Steve Irwin when I worked at his zoo. I'd actually met him before that, when I was very young before he was famous, and his zoo was just a reptile park. He was super chill back then and would do the reptile demonstrations, then stand around chatting with visitors. I got to working in his zoo through my school's work experience. Was meant to be a 1-week thing, but I got to stay on. One morning it was cold, I had my jacket on and was walking somewhere quickly. Saw a guy on a motorbike talking to another staff member further down the path, he waved at me and rode off. When I caught up to the guy, he laughed when he recognized me and told me that was Steve, thought I was rushing for an autograph and he was in a rush. Later that day I was in the staff area and Steve saw me and apologized for rushing off. He wasn't at the zoo every day, and when he was very busy. Always polite and friendly, but he sometimes just didn't have the time to be swarmed by guests, so he would stay out of the public areas when not doing a show. Another time I walked into staff area and he was holding some coconut shells up to his chest like a bra when he saw me, then sheepishly put them behind his back while the guys around him just laughed. I walked into the awkward moment of a joke. He passed away that same year. It was really hard on me when I got to spend time with him and his family, and his death was so heavily publicized. I found out in the last class of the day at school when a boy walked in and just said Steve Irwin died. Teacher checked online and it was true. The walk from that class to my locker, all I could hear was people talking about it. A friend's little brother even came up in my face with his arms in the air, yelling Steve Irwin's dead, woo-oh. Very few people believed I worked for and knew him. My friend group tried to keep people from talking about it so insensitively in front of me, but it was everywhere. A few days later even had some Jehovah's Witnesses show up at my door trying to use his name in their preaching. I could only imagine how hard it was on his family, and I felt so terrible for his kids. Could never bring myself to go back to the zoo. Anthony Bourdain, totally chill, knowledgeable, interested in learning about our city. Generous with his knowledge. Guy Fieri, on the other hand, is an arrogant twit. I went to a school that Kid Rock either went to or he was from the town or whatever. Well, one year my choir teacher is like, we are gonna write our own a cappella version of Born Free and sing it to my fiancée for her birthday. We spent months on this BC, we thought it was so cute of him, and we were all so down. Time comes and we go to the auditorium to perform for her, and some Best Buy rep was there taking our phones. Everyone's like, WTF, are we getting new phones? And of course there's the kids thinking it's Oprah or something, lol. Lo and behold, Kid Rock comes out and we sang his own song to him. It was crazy cool and we got a group interview with him and some pics. Then we went to the school assembly in the gym and did the song again and surprised the whole school with Kid Rock. Our phones were taken to keep the surprise. He ended up donating a few thousand to the music program there which Best Buy matched. It was all in all a pretty cool experience. I don't often think of it, but when I do it's a fond memory. Keanu Reeves, it was breathtaking. I saw Pete Davidson about a year ago walking around the streets of Nick. We stared at each other for a few seconds because I knew him from somewhere, and he knew that I probably knew him too, and his facial expression was like, "Aren't you gonna say something? Don't you know who I am?" I said nothing because I normally don't like to be that guy. My brother saw Paul McCartney walking around Tribeca with like one other person in broad daylight. He said his hair was floating. I've met a few, so I'll just list them off quickly with a short recap. Charles Martinet. Met him at a KNA session at a Comic-Con a few weeks ago. He was funny, enthusiastic, nice, and overall a chill dude. Rob Paulson. Met him at the same Comic-Con. He enjoyed the pop figure I got him to sign for me. Elle Stein. Met him at an author festival last year. Was confident in me about my career choice as a scriptwriter and even gave me some advice. I met Mac Miller a few years ago. It was a meet and greet, but I got there dumb early and was the first to meet him, so I got a little extra time to hang around him. He was so chill, exactly how you'd imagine. I barely remember what I said, he was my favorite rapper, still is. I feel lucky I got to meet him. Met Weird Al in the parking lot of the venue he was later performing at in New Hampshire like 15-ish years ago. My dad is the kind of guy who will hang out in parking lots, show up early or stay late to stuff, trying to get autographs and meet celebrities. It always mortified me because I felt like we were bothering people and I hated to make a fuss or bother anyone. Weird Al was super, incredibly nice, and not at all bothered about us lurking around the big buses, just waiting for him like weirdos. He signed a $2 bill for me, my dad specifically brought it, and my brother's sweatshirt, talked to us for a few minutes and left. The show was also awesome. I was like 14, and it's still one of my favorite concert memories. Met Jacob Batalon. He plays Ned, Peter Parker's best friend in Homecoming and Endgame. I was at the New York Auto Show and my friend saw him and was like, "Is that JB?" I was like, "JB isn't bald, that can't be him." We look it up and that was him. So we go up to him and say hi, and then my friend took a picture with him, but then he asked if me and my other friend wanted a picture, and we were like, "No, it's okay," but he seemed kinda sad. I regret not taking the picture, but whatever. Cool guy. This one may not count as much, but I live in Savannah, Georgia, and Paula Deen happens to live right up the road from me. I used to work at Subway and one evening right before closing I hear this lady come inside and shout, "Knock knock." I was frustrated because I wanted to get my closing stuff done, and I shouted, "Hold on a second." From the back room. As I turn around there she is just smiling at me, and I just say, "Oh hey." We get to talking as I make her turkey sandwich and her husband's chicken salad, and I must say, she is a very down-to-earth and true Southern belle. She complimented my sandwich artist skills and left me a nice $5 tip in my tip jar. I didn't bother her about her fame or who she was and just treated her like any other local, and I think she really respected that. She then came in a lot more often, and I would always say, "Hey Miss Paula, how are you today?" She really is a genuine person. I met the woman who played Mary Ann in Gilligan's Island. Also my cousin played in a couple episodes of Shameless, and he knows Leslie Mann and her daughter, Iris Apatow, really well. Also a few other people who weren't so big. I met you and that was the best thing that has happened to me this month. Happy Cake Day. My buddy and I meet Quentin Tarantino in Austin. We weren't sure it was him at first, so my buddy walks up and says, "Anyone ever tell you you look like Tarantino?" He replies, "Yeah, my mom," and proceeds to walk out the door. We were huge Pulp Fiction fans and totally messed up that encounter. Tommy Wiseau, and just like his movie. He was awkward but I was laughing at him the entire time. Not in front of him, mind you. Also for years I thought he was using a fake accent to sound artsy in his movie. Turns out that is actually how he talks. Still, chill guy, signed my forearm. I met Donald Sutherland and he was cool as fuck. I also met Natalie Dormer, who was lovely and amazing and even more beautiful in person. I met McLovin and he's cool and super nice. I talked to Agent Coulson at a celebrity basketball game. Met Josh Hutcherson a few times. Saw Jennifer Lawrence. So, I've pretty much met people who were in the Hunger Games. I was invited to the premiere of the last movie. I have pictures. My uncle met Alice Cooper yet and said that he was a super nice guy, gave him his undivided attention. He only had 3 minutes with him, but my uncle said it felt like an hour because Alice was genuinely listening to him. I've met a handful. I was born with 5 congenital heart defects and 2 congenital lung defects, many open heart surgeries, and other health issues. And from time to time, someone would come to Children's in Chicago. I'm 2003, I was 13 and it was Friday the 13th. I had an upper respiratory infection and was admitted because I was having my 4th open heart surgery 3-ish weeks from then. I was released. And like always we were staying at Ronald McDonald House. That next day I spent 3-ish hours with Nick Carter and 3-ish hours with Celine Dion. It was World Children's Day and Chicago was the host that year. While I'm in no way saying Backstreet Boys are like the Beatles. But meeting Nick was like my version of meeting a Beatle. He and Celine were so incredibly kind. I was sitting next to Celine and sang. It was amazing and helped getting my mind off things. About a week later we were told I was on the cover of Us Weekly with Celine. And that next fall, a commercial ran for about 3 years for Ronald McDonald House. It is very strange in watching TV and then you see yourself on TV. A few years later a family had gifted tickets to a Hilary Duff concert because their daughter was too sick to go. So I got to meet her before the concert. We went backstage. Got to our seats in a golf cart. About 3 weeks later I'd gotten a package. It was from her, she was touched by my story life and wanted to help in some way. It had a lot of things, but my favorites were actual clothes from her closet. I still wear one. There's a few more. But these are the highlights. Grant Hill came by a lot when I worked at Universal. He was always with a different group of kids he would bring to the park for free. Cool dude. Ariana Grande was a punk. Chris Jericho was cool. I was too starstruck to get close to Randy Moss. I've seen a few famous people, but I never approach them because I don't want to bother them. Jason Alexander, Keith David, Stan Lee are ones that come to mind. So because of that, the most famous person I've ever actually met was Brandon Sanderson. Who, needless to say, is an awesome dude. Met Josh Peck, the Nickelodeon star. Is exactly how he seems from his Vines and YouTube. Extremely nice and pleasurable person. Took a pic with him, talked a bit and parted ways. My dad met Stephen Hawking before he was famous at an airport. He ran over my dad's foot with his wheelchair and didn't say sorry.